My girlfriend's brother lived in my house for free, ate my food, and treated me like his personal butler. I put up with it for months, all for her. But the moment he had the audacity to call me a guest in my own home and tell me to respect his rules, the free ride came to a screeching, legally binding halt. They thought it was their house. The formal eviction notice I served them proved otherwise. My relationship didn't end with a bang. It ended with the click of a thermostat. That's the most absurd and infuriating part of it all. It wasn't some dramatic, tear-filled confrontation or a grand betrayal revealed in the pouring rain. It was a quiet, mundane disagreement over the temperature inside my own house. A house that I had bled and sweat for. A property I purchased with my own hard-earned money 5 years before my girlfriend, Sarah, and her black hole of a brother ever crossed its threshold. Her brother, Kevin, had become a permanent fixture in my life, a human-shaped lump on my couch for the last 4 months. His presence was supposed to be a temporary mercy mission. The original agreement, brokered by a tearful and pleading Sarah, was that he would crash for a month, maybe 2 at the absolute maximum, just long enough to get back on his feet after losing his job. It was a classic sob story. The world was unfair, his boss had it out for him, he just needed a soft place to land. My home, apparently, was that soft place. In the 120 days that had passed since that initial agreement, the only thing Kevin had managed to get back on was my sofa, where he had seemingly entered a state of symbiotic fusion with the cushions. His days were a masterclass in inertia, a monotonous cycle of video games, streaming marathons, and a truly pioneering effort in the field of snack food forensics. He left a trail of greasy wrappers and empty soda cans in his wake that would have allowed a team of archaeologists to perfectly reconstruct his diet of chips, candy, and microwavable burritos. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday night. I remember it vividly because it was the culmination of a particularly grueling 12-hour shift at the construction site. My muscles ached, my boots were caked in mud, and all I wanted was the simple comfort of my own home. A cool drink, a hot shower, and a moment of peace. What I got instead was a blast of suffocating heat the moment I opened the front door. The air was thick and stagnant, cranked up to a balmy 80 degrees. It was like walking into the humid depths of a tropical jungle. And there, in the heart of this self-created Amazon, was Kevin. He was sprawled on the couch, wearing nothing but a pair of basketball shorts, a sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. The massive 75-inch television, my television, was blaring with the sounds of digital explosions as he furiously mashed the buttons on the controller. "Kev, what's with the heat?" I asked, making a conscious effort to keep the bone-deep exhaustion from bleeding into my voice. He didn't bother to look away from the screen, let alone pause his game. "Felt a chill, man," he grunted, his attention still completely captivated by the virtual war zone on the screen. A chill. In an 80-degree house. The sheer absurdity of it was staggering. I ignored him and walked directly to the thermostat on the wall, my sanctuary's control panel. I pushed the button, lowering the temperature to a far more sane and reasonable 70 degrees. A few moments later, the air conditioning unit outside rumbled to life with what sounded like a profound sigh of relief, a sentiment I shared completely. The gentle hum of the AC kicking on was the sound that finally broke Kevin's spell. He paused his game. He actually turned his entire body on the couch and looked at me, his face a perfect mask of indignation and annoyance, as if I had just committed an unspeakable act of treason. "Dude, what are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp. I had it set there for a reason. I was too tired for this. "It's 80 degrees in here, Kevin," I stated, my patience wearing dangerously thin. "I'm not paying a $500 utility bill to air condition the entire neighborhood just because you felt a chill." And that's when he said it. The sentence. The collection of words, so breathtaking in their arrogance, that future historians, should they ever choose to document the downfall of my relationship, will point to as the precise moment of its death. He swung his legs off the couch and stood up, puffing out his chest in a laughable display of dominance. With a completely straight face, devoid of any irony or self-awareness, he delivered the line. "Look, man," he began, his tone condescendingly instructive. "You're a guest here too, in a way. You need to respect the rules of my sister's house." I just stared at him, my brain momentarily short-circuiting as it tried to process the statement. The sheer, uncut, weapons-grade audacity of it was a thing to behold. It was almost a work of art in its magnificent stupidity. The words hung in the thick, humid air between us, shimmering with a kind of surreal, idiotic majesty. My house. The house for which the deed a very official and legally binding document, bears my name and my name alone. The house for which I, and only I, pay the mortgage, the property taxes, and the ridiculously high utility bills that his personal climate preferences were currently inflating. This house, my single greatest financial and personal achievement, was now his sister's house. And I, the owner, was a mere guest who needed to respect the rules. The universe chose that exact moment for Sarah to walk in from the kitchen. She was carrying a large bowl of freshly microwaved popcorn, an offering clearly intended for her brother, the conquering hero of the couch. She immediately sensed the tension, her eyes darting between my stunned silence and Kevin's defiant posture. "What's going on?" she asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice, as if we were two children squabbling over a toy. I found my voice, but it was flat, devoid of all emotion. "Your brother," I said, my gaze locked on her, "has just informed me that this is your house and that I, as a guest, need to follow his rules regarding the thermostat." I waited. I waited for her to laugh, to chastise him, to rush to my defense and correct his ludicrous delusion. Instead, she just rolled her eyes. Not at him, at me. "Oh my God, don't be so dramatic," she huffed, dismissing my concern with a wave of her hand. "He just likes a little warmer. It's not a big deal. Don't be such a baby about it." She didn't defend me. She didn't correct her freeloading, unemployed brother. She took his side. She validated his insane narrative. And in that instant, the last remaining threads of my affection and respect for her simply evaporated. It all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Kevin wasn't the problem. He was just a symptom. They weren't two separate issues I had to deal with. They were a team, a single parasitic entity that had latched onto my life and my home, draining me of my resources and my sanity. They saw me not as a partner, not as a generous host, but as a resource, an inconvenient landlord who just happened to live in their house. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. The fight had completely drained out of me, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. I looked from Kevin's smug face to Sarah's dismissive one. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet. "My mistake." I walked past them, not giving either of them a second glance. I went upstairs to my bedroom, a room I now realized was the only part of the house that still felt like mine, and I closed and locked the door. Downstairs, they probably thought they had one. I could almost hear their triumphant whispers, Sarah telling Kevin I was just moody and overtired, Kevin bragging about putting me in my place. They likely assumed I was upstairs sulking, that I would cool off, and that by morning, everything would return to their version of normal. They were profoundly, catastrophically wrong. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months had finally burned away, leaving behind something far more dangerous: clarity. I was no longer a frustrated partner. I was an architect, and as I sat at my desk, I began to quietly and methodically draw up the blueprints for their complete and total removal from my life. I opened my laptop, the soft glow of the screen illuminating my determined face. The first thing I typed in a search bar was landlord-tenant lawyer near me. The second was legal eviction process for tenant at will in my state. They thought they were making the rules in my house. They had absolutely no idea that they were about to be introduced to a much more official, legally binding rulebook. And I was going to relish the experience of reading it to them, line by painful line. Update 1. It has now been 1 week since the historic diplomatic failure I've come to call the Great Thermostat Summit. The reaction to my initial post was nothing short of overwhelming, and I want to extend my gratitude to the hundreds of strangers who took the time to confirm that I am not, in fact, the one who has lost his mind. Your validation was a welcome beacon in a sea of gaslighting. The day after Kevin, the self-appointed king of my couch, declared my home a sovereign state ruled by his sister, I followed through on my plan. I had a formal consultation with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Mr. Davies, who had the weary eyes of someone who had seen every possible variation of human entitlement. He listened to my story without interruption, his expression unchanging, and when I was finished, he confirmed everything my late-night research had suggested. Because Sarah and Kevin had been residing in the house for more than 30 days, had their mail delivered here, and had effectively established residency, I couldn't simply change the locks and toss their belongings onto the lawn, as tempting as that fantasy was. I was legally obligated to follow the formal eviction process. It was a minor procedural hurdle, an annoying delay in my quest for liberation, but Mr. Davies stressed that doing everything by the book would render the final outcome legally ironclad. That was all that mattered to me. I wanted their exit to be absolute and undeniable. My new lawyer wasted no time. He drafted two identical, formal 30-day notices to quit. These were not friendly letters suggesting it was time for them to move on. They were official legal documents filled with intimidating jargon, citing termination of tenancy at will, and featuring their full legal names. Most importantly, they contained a move-out date set for exactly 30 days from the date of service. I made the strategic decision to serve them on a Friday night. I wanted their entire weekend to be poisoned by the news, just as they had so carelessly poisoned countless moments of my own peace and quiet. I arrived home from work that evening and, predictably, found them in their usual stations. Sarah was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, scrolling through some online boutique. Kevin was, of course, on the couch, a headset on, yelling at a group of teenagers he was playing against in some mindless video game. The scene was so familiar it made my stomach ache with a dull, familiar dread. But this time it was different. This was the last act. I walked into the house without a word of greeting. I went directly to the kitchen table and placed the first folded document squarely on top of Sarah's laptop, right over a picture of a handbag she was considering. Then, I proceeded to the living room and placed the second document directly on Kevin's chest as he lay there. He flinched, startled by the sudden contact. "What's this?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with annoyance at the interruption of her retail therapy. "It's a legal notice," I said, my voice calm and devoid of emotion. "I suggest you read it carefully." She unfolded the paper, her brow furrowed in confusion. I watched her eyes scan the first few lines, trying to make sense of the dense legal text. I saw the exact moment the words registered. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to a pale, ghostly white, and finally settled on a deep, blotchy red of pure fury. "What is this?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. You're evicting me?" From the couch, Kevin had paused his game and was reading his own copy of the notice. "Dude, what the hell?" he bellowed, sitting up abruptly. "You can't evict us. This is Sarah's house." The delusion, it seemed, was deeply ingrained and possibly terminal. "No, Kevin," I said, turning to him, my voice as cold and steady as a block of ice. "This is my house. The deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. The bills are in my name. You are both legally classified as tenants at will. And as of this moment, your tenancy has been officially terminated. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. It is all perfectly and completely legal, and I suggest you consult a lawyer if you doubt that fact." Sarah finally found her voice again, and when she did, it was several octaves higher than her normal speaking tone, a shrill shriek of disbelief. "You're ending our relationship over the thermostat? Are you insane? You're throwing me out onto the street over one stupid fight." "No, Sarah," I said, meeting her enraged gaze without flinching. "The thermostat wasn't the reason. The thermostat was just a symptom. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence that proved what I've been suspecting for months. I'm ending this because you and your brother have made it painfully clear that you view me not as a partner, but as a walking wallet with a roof attached. I'm ending this because your brother, a grown man who has not contributed a single dollar to this household in 4 months, had the breathtaking audacity to tell me to respect the rules in my own home. And most importantly, I'm ending this because you stood right there, heard him say it, and you defended him. You chose him over me, over us, over reality itself. This has been coming for a very long time. The tears started then, as I knew they would. But they weren't tears of sadness or remorse. They were tears of pure, frustrated rage. The reality of her situation was beginning to dawn on her, and she didn't like it one bit. She started screaming, a torrent of accusations about the years she had invested in our relationship, about how I was a cruel, heartless monster for doing this to her. Kevin, ever the loyal second in command, chimed in, blustering about his rights as a tenant and threatening to sue me into oblivion. I just stood there, a silent, immovable object, and let the storm of their fury break against me. I let them yell and scream and cry until they had exhausted themselves. When they were finally done, panting and glaring at me with hateful eyes, I spoke again, my voice unchanged. "The notice is legal and binding. A copy has already been filed with the local court. You have 30 days. I suggest you spend less time yelling and more time packing." The rest of that weekend was a descent into a special kind of domestic hell, which was precisely what I had anticipated and, in a way, what I felt they deserved. They deployed every tactic in the manipulator's handbook. They tried the silent treatment, refusing to acknowledge my existence as they stomped around the house. They engaged in loud, pointed phone calls with their mother, where Sarah would sob theatrically about how I was callously throwing them out onto the street for no reason whatsoever. Their mother, of course, called me, her voice dripping with misplaced indignation. I calmly and factually explained the situation, from Kevin's freeloading to the thermostat incident to Sarah's complicity. She tried to guilt-trip me, to appeal to my sense of decency, but my resolve was absolute. They have 30 days, I repeated, a calm, unassailable mantra. My decision is final. The house has now been transformed into a Cold War zone, divided into armed camps. They have barricaded themselves in the guest room and Sarah's former home office, emerging only for food and to glare at me in the hallways. The very air is thick with their resentment and disbelief. They are still operating under the delusion that this is a negotiation, a dramatic gesture on my part that I will eventually walk back. They think that if they push hard enough, I will break. They're about to spend the next 28 days learning just how wrong they are. Update 2. We are now 20 days into the 30-day eviction period, and the atmosphere in the house has shifted from Cold War to a series of desperate, last-ditch guerrilla warfare campaigns. Their tactics have escalated in ways that are so transparently manipulative they border on the comical. They genuinely, truly believed I would cave. Every morning they wake up and find me still resolute. The deadline one day closer. Their panic visibly grows, curdling the air. The first week was dedicated to a campaign of psychological warfare, a pathetic attempt to make me so uncomfortable in my own home that I would surrender. They would deliberately leave the kitchen in a state of utter chaos, a monument to their passive aggression. They'd use every single dish, pot, and pan, and leave them piled in the sink, smeared with ketchup and dried food. They'd blast obnoxious music from the guest room at all hours of the night, the bass thumping through the walls. I refused to engage. I simply went to the store and bought a large supply of paper plates and plastic cutlery. I had a locksmith come and install a new, heavy-duty lock on my bedroom door. I invested in a top-of-the-line pair of noise-canceling headphones. Every mess they made, I calmly photographed, time-stamped, and saved to a growing file on my laptop labeled Evidence of Antagonism. Their petty acts of rebellion were just building my case. When it became clear that their attempts at making me miserable were failing, Sarah switched her strategy from passive aggression to active emotional manipulation. She began leaving old photographs of us from happier times in conspicuous places, on the coffee table, taped to the refrigerator, propped up against my coffee maker. She would try to initiate conversations about the good times, her voice soft and nostalgic, as if none of the recent unpleasantness had occurred. The apex of this strategy came one evening when I came home to find she had cooked my favorite meal, a steak dinner, something she hadn't done in over a year. She approached me, her expression a carefully constructed mask of contrition. "I was wrong," she said, her voice a pleading whisper. "I've been thinking, and you were right. We can fix this. Just tear up those silly papers. We can tell Kevin he has to get a job, and we can go back to how things were." It was a masterful performance, so completely out of character that I was momentarily stunned into silence. I looked at the plate of food, then at her. "The person you were in a relationship with is gone, Sarah," I told her, my voice flat and final. "You and your brother killed him with your selfishness and disrespect. You have 22 days left to pack your things." I walked away without touching the food. The most significant shift occurred when the cold, hard reality of their financial situation finally penetrated their thick skulls of entitlement. I had, of course, immediately and ruthlessly separated all of our finances the day after I consulted my lawyer. The joint bank account we used for household expenses was closed, and I had the funds transferred to a new account in my name only. The supplementary credit card she had on my account was canceled. I went through and systematically changed the passwords on every shared service: Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, even the grocery delivery app. The gravy train had not only left the station, it had been dismantled, melted down, and sold for scrap metal. It turned out that Sarah's part-time job as a social media consultant for a few local businesses brought in just enough income to cover her car payment and fuel her online shopping addiction. It was nowhere near enough to cover the first and last month's rent and a security deposit on even a rundown one-bedroom apartment, let alone a two-bedroom place that could accommodate her and her leech of a brother. And Kevin, it was revealed, had not applied for a single job in the entire 4 months he had been living in my house. His grand plan to get back on his feet had apparently consisted of planting his feet firmly on my coffee table and extending his hands toward my wallet. Last week, their desperation led them to try a more direct, brute force approach. I came home from work to find an ambush waiting for me in my living room. Sarah and Kevin were there, along with their parents, all of them sitting in a solemn, judgmental circle. Michael, her father, a man I'd always found to be pompous and condescending, began, attempting a tone of patriarchal reason. "We think this has all gone far enough. You made your point. Sarah is very sorry. Now, let's all be reasonable adults and tear up this silly eviction notice." I remained standing, my work bag still in my hand. "There is nothing silly about it," I stated clearly. "It is a legal document, filed with the court, and its terms are not up for discussion or negotiation. You are putting my son out on the street," her mother cried, her voice quivering with manufactured outrage. "Your son," I replied, my gaze unflinching, "is a 30-year-old man who has been living off of my generosity for 4 months without contributing a single thing. He is your responsibility, not mine. As of 12 days from now, he will be your problem to solve, not mine." The conversation, predictably, devolved from there. They hurled accusations at me. I was cruel. I was heartless. I was betraying Sarah. They just couldn't or wouldn't grasp the fundamental concept that their adult children's comfort and well-being were not my legal or moral obligation. They had been so confident in their position, so sure of my weakness, that they had overplayed their hand and lost the entire game. As they were leaving, their ambush a complete failure, her father pulled me aside, his face dark with anger. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I looked him dead in the eye. "The only thing I regret," I said, my voice low and steady, "is not doing this 3 months ago." They are now in a state of frantic, panicked activity. They are finally scouring apartment listings online, a task they should have started months ago. They are making calls and discovering the harsh reality that their budget gets them a shoebox-sized apartment in a bad part of town with no amenities. The crushing reality of what they have so carelessly thrown away, a beautiful, spacious, free home, is finally crashing down on them with the force of a tidal wave. There are 10 days left. I've already started stocking up on packing tape, boxes, and heavy-duty trash bags. Not for them, for me. The moment their U-Haul pulls away, I plan on having a team of professionals come in to deep clean, fumigate, and spiritually purify every square inch of this house. Final update. The 30-day countdown has reached its glorious conclusion. The freeloaders have been officially launched from the premises. I am writing this from the profound and blessedly silent sanctuary of my clean, quiet, and wonderfully empty house. The sense of peace is so absolute, it feels like a physical presence, a warm and welcome guest. The final 10 days of their occupation were a pathetic spectacle, a blur of last-minute, desperate bargaining and the frantic, disorganized chaos of their packing. They had finally, at long last, accepted the undeniable truth. I was not bluffing. The closer the deadline loomed, the more their entitled rage melted away, replaced by a sort of whimpering, pathetic fear that was almost sad to witness, but not quite. Their apartment hunt was a predictable disaster. They couldn't find a single place that they deemed suitable within their non-existent budget. It came as a profound shock to them that most landlords in the real world expect prospective tenants to have things like a steady income, a decent credit score, and a verifiable rental history. 3 things they as a parasitic team sorely lacked. I took no chances on the final day. Following the explicit advice of my lawyer, I had arranged for a sheriff's deputy to arrive at 12 o'clock noon, the exact moment the eviction notice became legally enforceable. His job was to supervise their removal from the property, ensuring there was no last-minute drama, no destruction of my property, and no refusal to leave. They were still haphazardly throwing their belongings into trash bags when the deputy, a large and imposing man with an expression of profound boredom, knocked authoritatively on the door. The sight of a uniformed officer on the porch seemed to be the final blow that shattered their last vestiges of resistance. The fight was completely gone from their eyes, replaced by a dull, defeated resignation. Watching them haul their cheap, particle board furniture and countless bags of clothes out of my house was one of the most surreal and satisfying experiences of my life. Every box they carried across the threshold felt like a physical weight being lifted from my own shoulders. With each trip they made to the rented U-Haul their parents had brought, I felt my posture straighten, my breathing deepen. Their parents, their faces grim and etched with fury, arrived to help with the final loading. They refused to even look at me, their silence a testament to their own defeated entitlement. They just wordlessly helped their two failed adult children load up the detritus of their failed cohabitation. The final, most perfect moment of this entire saga came as Kevin was carrying his last box out the door. He stopped on the porch, turned back to look at me where I stood observing the exodus from my doorway, and with a spiteful sneer, he said, "You're going to be real lonely in this big house all by yourself." The sheriff's deputy, who had been watching the proceedings with the deadpan expression of a man who had seen it all, simply raised an eyebrow. "Son," he said, his voice dripping with a weary, professional boredom, "I think he'll manage." Kevin's face turned a shade of bright crimson. He scurried away without another word, a dog retreating with its tail between its legs. It was a perfect, understated, and utterly humiliating end to his tyrannical reign over my thermostat. The aftermath has been exactly as they deserved. As predicted, they moved back into their parents' home. From what I've pieced together through a mutual friend who remains in contact with Sarah, the situation is a complete and utter disaster. Their parents' small, quiet, meticulously kept suburban home has been transformed into a war zone. Kevin and Sarah, having become accustomed to living in my spacious house with zero rules or responsibilities, are now chafing under the thumb of their parents' household regulations. They are reportedly still unemployed, still radiating an aura of aggrieved entitlement. And now, finally, they are their parents' problem to solve. About a month after their departure, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was her mother. It wasn't the angry tirade I might have expected. It was a single, simple sentence that spoke volumes. "I think I understand now." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. My revenge was not loud or explosive. It was quiet, meticulously planned, legally executed, and absolute. I didn't just kick them out of my house. I forced them to crash headfirst into the consequences of their own deeply ingrained entitlement. They had moved through life with the arrogant assumption that the world, and specifically me, owed them a comfortable existence. They have now learned, in the most unpleasant way possible, that a life of comfort is something you build for yourself, not something you leech from the generosity of others. They were handed a golden ticket, a life of ease and luxury they had done nothing to earn, and they threw it all away because they were too arrogant to be grateful and too lazy to be respectful. I have spent the last month engaged in a project of reclamation. I hired painters to cover every wall in the house with fresh, new colors, erasing any lingering energy of their presence. I sold the couch that Kevin had colonized, the one with the permanent indentation of his body, and bought a beautiful new one that no freeloader will ever touch. I can now set my thermostat to any temperature I damn well please, a small but incredibly significant act of freedom. But the silence is the best part. There are no loud video games rattling the floorboards, no passive-aggressive sighs from the kitchen, no constant, gnawing sense of being used and taken for granted. It is the sound of peace. They try to make my house theirs. They try to make their rules my rules. But in the end, a simple piece of paper, first a deed, and then an eviction notice, proved to be more powerful than all of their delusion. Manipulation and entitlement combined. They didn't just learn whose house it was. They learned the steep and painful cost of losing a home they never deserved in the first place. And that, my friends, is a lesson you can't put a price tag on.